Hey, just hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to the first event of the International Refugee Integration and Settlement Exchange, or IRISE, where we're going to look at where we find hope in refugee resettlement in challenging times. My name is Louise Olive, and I work for the Refugee Council of Australia, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today. I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations here in Melbourne, Australia. And I want to welcome you from whichever lands you're on right now. To start with a little bit of housekeeping, I just wanted to let you know we will be recording this session, although we have a lot of people registered. We have over 190 people registered, so we're not going to have an option to share your screen, but later on we might give some participants an opportunity to unmute yourselves to speak. And so just to keep that in mind, if you're making an intervention, that we will be recording. So what we're going to do today is have an official launch and a little bit of an introduction to who IRISE is. And then we're going to have a conversation about where we are in terms of resettlement and complementary pathways in our 4 countries that we're focusing on, and a little bit of a reflection about where we find hope and solidarity in refugee resettlement in challenging times. And then finally, we're going to look at where do we go from here, particularly as an international network, this being our first one. How do we, how do we think about these sorts of exchanges in finding hope? Before I hand over to our first speaker, I wanted to invite you all to click on the link in the chat, or to, sorry, wrong one. Sorry, the link is there. I was confused by my own slides. Is to click in the link in the chat, or to use your phone, and you can use the QR code on the screen right now, and you can answer 3 quick questions while we invite our first speaker to speak. If you can answer that, then we'll have a little bit of a showing of who is in the room after our first speaker. And I know that as a webinar, because you can't see everyone, it's hard to get that feeling for who's in the room. So we're hoping that this gives a bit of sense of who's joining us today and from where. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Paul Power, who is the CEO of the Refugee Council of Australia. And Paul has been really instrumental alongside colleagues from Refugee Council USA, Canadian Council of Refugees, and from the New Zealand Red Cross in really getting this conversation and this event happening today. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Louise. And welcome everyone. Many friends in different countries who are participating, so it's great that you're supporting this initiative. So just to explain how the International Refugee Integration and Settlement Exchange came about, it's really come out of the annual tripartite consultations on resettlement process, which is now the consultations on resettlement and complementary pathways. I've been part of those meetings annually since 2007, and the forum has changed over the years. Probably a significant change occurred maybe 12 or 13 years ago, when there began to be a greater focus on post-arrival settlement, and because up to that point, UNHCR's interest in the ATCR process was really on getting people basically through customs in resettlement countries, and there often wasn't a lot of discussion about the issues which occurred after refugees arrived. But when Australia chaired in 2012, we were keen to actually have a working group meeting looking at post-arrival settlement. Actually had a meeting in Melbourne. And since then, most hosts have actually organised a working group meeting in a city within their country focused on post-arrival settlement. The challenge, I mean, these meetings have been fantastic, for the small number of people who've been allowed to attend. But the problem is that many people, who would like to participate don't get an opportunity because of restricted numbers or haven't got the resources to be able to travel, even if they were invited. There was a reform process for the annual tripartite consultations on resettlement, which ran over a couple of years. Brian Dick and a few others of us were involved in, and John Slocum were involved in those discussions. I tried unsuccessfully to broaden the scope of who could attend these working group meetings, but found that there was reluctance from governments, from UNHCR, and little interest in Europe because the Europeans already have their own share network, which is funded by the EU. So what became obvious was that the wish for greater connections between people involved in refugee settlement and support were actually coming from NGOs in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. And so, and this became even more obvious when we had a breakout session at last year's consultations on resettlement and complementary pathways in Geneva. That was definitely this particular group of NGOs from these four countries, that were most interested in being able to share across international barriers. So this is how the IRISE idea came to be, and it was clear that there was strong support for this idea from Refugee Council USA, the Canadian Council for Refugees, and New Zealand Red Cross. And our four organisations have formed a steering group, which has been involved in developing this idea of this exchange. And the idea is very simple. It's really to create a forum for people who are involved in supporting refugees after resettlement or after they've arrived through complementary pathways, to be able to share ideas and to connect with people who are doing similar work in other countries in North America and the Pacific. And you can see the explainer that's in the chat gives you a one-page background to the exchange and what it's all about. So, but it's a simple idea, and really what our vision is that through this exchange, that we can have people who have practical expertise in different aspects of post-arrival support for refugees to be able to lead discussions on those topics. We found through our involvement as the co-chair of last year's consultations on resettlement and complementary pathways, and we also held a working group on resettlement meeting in Sydney, that if you actually create the space for the experts within the network to lead discussion on the issues that they know best, that is actually the most effective way of building dialogue. One thing that we've also learned is the importance of respecting the expertise that exists, within this network of organisations that are involved in refugee settlement and in complementary pathways, whether people are working from the perspective, of funded NGOs, unfunded NGOs, refugee-led organisations, informal networks, through people's practical experience, they're actually, develop expertise, in the situations that they're responding to. So, for instance, we found great success in organising events on issues, for instance, such as mental health support for resettled refugees by asking organisations that were expert in that field to be able to lead the discussions at the working group meeting and the consultations in Geneva. And we really want to create that sort of model where people who have expertise, actually know some of the people that are doing similar work in other countries, can actually take a lead in organising events as part of this exchange. What we'd also like to be able to see is people who would never get the opportunity because of restrictions on numbers and because of the lack of money in their own budget, to be able to connect with counterparts in other countries, particularly people who are working in smaller cities and towns in across Australia, New Zealand, United States and Canada, to be able to connect with people who are doing similar work in similar types of settings in other countries. So in terms of who's involved, from the Refugee Council of Australia's perspective, Louise is coordinating the exchange, and obviously I'm involved in supporting that as well. Refugee Council USA, John Slocum and Emily Wood have led the discussions. From the Canadian Council for Refugees, Monica Abdul-Qadir, Brian Dick and Miriam Kaloon have been the people nominated by CCR to lead, and Sue Price is coordinating from New Zealand Red Cross. So if you want to get involved in further in those networks, you can reach out to those people, or you can contact Louise Olive, and Louise will put her, you possibly already have Louise's email, but she'll certainly put that in the chat. So basically what we're looking for are your ideas as to how this exchange could be useful for the work that you are doing in your country. You've obviously participated because you see some value in connecting with your counterparts in other countries. Let us know, of events that we could help to organise and coordinate. And also let us know about your willingness to help participate in leading some of those events, because we really want to respect the expertise that's actually of the people that are on the line. And so with those words, I will officially launch the International Refugee Integration and Settlement Exchange, and hand back to Lou.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. I wanted to have some sort of unicorn or something that flies across the screen, because actually it's a lot of work to build to something like this from a lot of people across a very wide geographic and time zone. So look, there's lots of emojis there. So that's wonderful. All right, so moving now on to the conversation, and I'm going to start by sharing the screen, which is going to give us a little picture about who's in the room. And I can see we have 97 odd participants right now, 99. Okay, hopefully we'll get to that magic 100. And what we have here, hopefully you can see this, is that we have a pretty good spread of people from across our 4 countries. I see nobody from any other country, which actually is fine. We thought maybe the word would get around to someone else, but I think this is what we intended, was this to be an exchange between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. So that's wonderful. So where are we all? Look at that. Wellington right in the middle, and Washington, Wellington, and Sydney. That's a little snapshot there of all of the cities that we're dialing in from. And it's amazing to actually think of how widespread this is. And apologies, I saw in the Q&A, Dor, that you mentioned you couldn't respond to the poll. This is something that we're trialing out, these tools as well, and that's good to know if there has been a limit on the number of participants, because it's a free poll everywhere. This is the free version of the application, so I apologize if you haven't been able to answer that. And then what expertise do we bring? And hopefully you understood you could have answered more than one of the questions, but apologies if you thought you had to choose one, because I think for many of us who work and play in this field, we bring many different perspectives. But we can see here that there's lots of people working for organisations providing practical support, working in policy and research, working in campaigning and advocacy. But we have volunteers, fantastic, from community organisations. We have some government colleagues, and we have, in terms of levels, lots of people working at a national level, but a good number working also at a local level, and smaller number at an international level. But I feel like after today, we can all say we're working at an international level if we're actively participating in this international exchange. So, and in many ways, our work is international, and that's why we're doing this in the way we are, because there are many commonalities across the work that we do, and it really is about welcoming people. So on that, I'm going to stop sharing. So moving on to our conversation session. As this is our first event, we thought we'd start with a kind of a big picture conversation, which is going to be challenging in the amount of time we have and in the complexity in all of our countries, but we're going to give it a red hot go. We're going to start hopefully with a brief snapshot of where we're at in each of our 4 countries when it comes to resettlement, complementary pathways, and post-arrival settlement and integration supports. And then we'll have some reflections and discussion on where we go from here and where we might find some draw inspiration and hope and ideas from each other. I wanted to also note that while we're starting big picture here and having some discussions, we also have a really wonderful group of graduate students at George Washington University in the US that our colleagues at Refugee Council USA are liaising with, who are producing a snapshot overview of each of our countries' approaches to settlement and integration, and we'll be sharing that in a future IRISE. So look forward to seeing a resource that also hopefully reflects this work that we all do, and so we can understand a little bit more about where each of us is coming from. So how are we going to run this conversation? We've tapped people on the shoulder from each of the 4 countries to answer 3 questions. But what we're going to try and do is strongly encourage you to use the Q&A function. You can all ask questions and answer questions in the Q&A. So the chat is closed, but the Q&A is open to participants. And what we're encouraging you to do, really asking you to do, is if someone wants to know more information about something, about what's going on in another country or a program or anything referred to, please put it as a question in the chat, and then anyone can answer that. So this is not about the experts that are speaking being the experts. They are, of course, but also there are participants who have really relevant and valuable knowledge. So you're all familiar, I think, with social media. Think of the Q&A like threads. So if you ask a question, try and answer the question directly underneath it. If you want to share a resource or anything like that, please also do that through the Q&A chat. All right, so we're also, just another point, we're not going to spend time on formal introductions because we have quite a number of people we've tapped on the shoulder. What we're going to do is put in the chat the names and affiliations of the different speakers. So if you're wondering who's talking, please have a look at the chat and we'll have that information there. So the very first question is really to provide that overview of resettlement and complementary pathways and what they currently look like in each of the 4 countries. We're going to start with the US. So I want to invite John Slocum from Refugee Council USA, even though I said I wasn't going to introduce you, there you are, to give us a view for those of us outside the US of what resettlement and complementary pathways look like right now.
Thank you, Louise, and it's good to see so many great colleagues on the screen and among the participant list, including lots of folks from the U.S. who could just as easily give this overview. Obviously, it's an exceptional time right now under the Trump administration. We're coming off. Our fiscal year begins October 1st, and we're coming off a previous fiscal year 2024, where we resettled in the United States just over 100,000 refugees, and that was the highest number in 30 years. The Biden administration, particularly as the election came and went in November, made every effort to get as many refugees into the country as possible. And I don't recall the final figure. It was just shy of 40,000, I think, that were resettled in the first 4 months of the current fiscal year when the door slammed shut. Since Inauguration Day, the Trump administration has attacked the refugee resettlement program and immigration more broadly through a series of executive actions. Refugee arrivals have been halted since an executive order was signed day 1 or day 2 of the administration. No refugees have been resettled In the months of February or March, there's been no overseas refugee processing. This has sadly been accompanied by interruption in funding to refugees that had already arrived in the United States as of the January 20th inauguration day. A related ban on foreign aid. Many folks will have heard of the really the evisceration of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the primary conduit of foreign assistance from the United States. That was followed by a termination of contracts provided through the 10 national resettlement agencies in the U.S. for initial reception and placement services. Those contracts there's been lots of litigation. Those contracts, the latest is that they've been simultaneously reinstated and suspended. So the contracts, it takes a lot of legal expertise to disentangle what all that implies. But the bottom line is that no refugees are coming into the country, and that not every resettlement agency to this day has been reimbursed for services that have already been provided to refugees already here. We're also expecting a nationality-based visa ban. This has been reported by a number of news sources. There are as many as 43 countries on the list that has made its way to the press. Some of those would have essentially a total ban on visas to the United States. There's basically three categories: red, orange, yellow. The orange countries would have sharp restrictions on visas, and then the yellow countries less severe. So, at any rate, the ban would affect many of the countries that the U.S. resettles refugee from. It includes Afghanistan, Bhutan, Cuba, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. In addition to this anticipated visa ban, there has been a termination of the humanitarian parole status that was offered to several 100,000 individuals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And I think you're aware that the number of deportations is beginning to climb, including some fairly extraordinary renditions to offshore detention facilities. In addition, there is a current suspension on green card processing, which is to say the provision of legal permanent residence to refugees who've applied for and who are eligible for it. That suspension we don't expect to be permanent, but the refugee program itself is presumably under a 90-day review by a set of federal agencies. That review is due to the White House by April 20th, so coming up soon. And at that point, there may be some resumption of refugee resettlement, as I think has also been widely reported. The administration has articulated a priority for resettling white South Africans. A lot of the program of this resettlement program is still under litigation. There are court orders that ought to have resulted in the reinstatement of some refugee processing and arrivals, but have not yet happened. So what are we doing? We as Refugee Council USA, we remain the coalition that includes the 10 national resettlement agencies and 32 other national nonprofits that serve and advocate for refugees and other forcibly displaced people. We are at this point beginning to implement an action plan, which has two goals. One is to defend, and the other to reimagine refugee protection. And sort of cross-cutting those goals, we're looking to stabilize political support for resettlement, to preserve the knowledge base. And I think my colleague Emily Wood, our Director of Programs, will speak a little bit more to an institutional knowledge project we have underway. We seek to, as always, empower refugees and other forcibly displaced people to become effective advocates, while at the same time doing all we can to help ensure their safety and security when it comes to participation in advocacy actions. And then we're seeking to mobilize a broader range of support beyond usual suspects and usual political allies for refugee protection. So in the context of that, we have a number of campaigns. The one that we're currently rolling out is called We Will Welcome. And we're also collecting sort of testimonials from individuals who have either been refugees or have worked in refugee resettlement, and other broader circle of stakeholders, including business people, local elected officials, and so forth, in hopes of sustaining support for the program. And I have gone way over 3 minutes, I just realized. So deepest apologies to my fellow panelists. I'll leave it at that.
That's all right, John, and thank you for sharing. It's actually really useful to hear from you directly, and I think I'm looking at my colleagues outside of the US, and I think it's important, even though, yes, you did go over time, that's fine. I think it was really a succinct summary of what we really need to hear. So thanks, John. Now moving to a very different context, New Zealand. I want to invite Rachel and Birgit to talk about what's going on in New Zealand.
Cool. So thanks, John. It's just, I mean, really thankful that I mean, our context is pretty different, and it's more business as usual, I guess, for us. So in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we don't get large numbers of asylum seekers. So we've had about 3,000, I think, people in the last 2 years. We've never had a boat of refugees arrive due to our isolation and the difficulty of actually getting here. We have a refugee quota of 1,500 people. The quota has been in place since 1987, and has for 30 years was at 750 people per year. Moved up to 1,000 in 2018 and then 1,500 in 2020 in response to a very successful Double the Quota campaign, which was masterminded and led by Murdoch Stevens, who I'm pretty sure is also on this call. Yeah, really, really good advocacy and successful work there. We had major interruptions during the COVID years, like everyone did, and only people from emergency situations were brought in. But in the last 2 years, there's been a concerted effort by government to bring the full 1,500. Every 3 years, the government sets international regional allocations based on UNHCR priorities and New Zealand international commitments. And currently, based on refugees' region of asylum, not region of nationality, we have 50% of the 1,500 coming from the Asia Pacific region, 20% each from Africa and the Middle East, and 10% from the Americas. And as has happened in other countries, we've had small one-off humanitarian intakes of Syrians, Afghans, and Ukrainians in the past decade. In addition to the quota, we have a refugee family support category, which accepts 600 people a year who are relatives of people who came to New Zealand as refugees, and their applications are processed under a 2-tier queue system, which prioritises people, former refugees who've got no other family members in New Zealand. And it's a bit like speed dating, isn't it, really? I'm going to pass to Birgit now.
Kia ora. Thank you, Rachel. And I just wanted to echo Louise's sentiments about the situation in the States. John, sending you all our love from here. We're all following what's happening in the States at the moment. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Birgit Grafrend-Watungwa, and I'm the Chief Executive for Host International Aotearoa, New Zealand. We are the umbrella organization for the Community Refugee Sponsorship Program, which is a complementary pathway to the Quota Refugee Program just to put into perspective the numbers of refugees we accept to our population, for those of you who don't know the size of New Zealand, we have a population of just over 5 million. And the Community Refugee Sponsorship Program started as a pilot in 2018 with 4 sponsor groups that sponsored 24 refugees at the time. We were then appointed as the umbrella organization in 2021 for an extended pilot, which initially was supposed to be for 3 years, but we were fortunate was extended for a 4th year. So we're coming to the end of the 4th year now. And over this time, we have now resettled 200 people being sponsored by 28 community groups across the country. And those groups provide support for 2 years to the arriving sponsored refugees. We're now at the point where we're starting our advocacy efforts to make this a permanent program. And so, of course, knowing with the global changes at the moment, we are still hoping that we will get that across the line soon. We will keep you posted. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you so much to Rachel and Birgit. Moving to Canada, Brian, let us know how things are going in Canada for you. And sorry, Brian, before you speak, anyone from the US can answer the question in the chat around, Arif has asked about the US program, and really encourage someone to answer that question.
Good. Thanks very much. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm looking forward to this continuing. First, a brief overview of immigration to Canada. There are 3 basic categories, and I have this chart here from 1980 to the present, and in fact, going to targets up to 2027. You can see the biggest category, about 60% at this point, is economic immigration. That's the blue line. In the middle there is the family reunification or family class, which involves people in Canada being able to sponsor a spouse or conjugal partner, a dependent child under 22, or parent and grandchildren. And then the green part is where we live. It's the humanitarian category, and that includes both resettled refugees, but also people who make inland claims. And if you're really interested in the I was going to try and put something in the chat, but I can't do that now. Anyway, if you want the stats later, I can help you with that. This is zooming in a little bit more, and you can see, of course, COVID put a dent in things, but for the most part, economic has been a big part of refugee or immigration to Canada, and this is permanent residency. Going to refugee resettlement, there are 4 basic ways that people are resettled to Canada. On the extreme left of this is the government-assisted refugees, or GARs as we talk about them. Those are UNHCR referred refugees for the most part. They're handed over to settlement agencies who will be responsible for them for the first 12 months that they are in Canada. That's one category. On the far right is the private sponsored refugees, or PSRs. They are typically somebody in Canada will name or nominate a refugee, and then a Canadian visa officer will either approve or deny their application. If they're approved, they come to Canada, and a private group will be responsible for them financially and for their settlement services for the first 12 months. In the middle, there are a couple of blended programs. They're blended because there's financial support from the government, but also support from private sponsorship. So those 4 categories, the 2 in the middle are smaller. PSR is right now the biggest, and government assisted is next to that. Over the 40 or 30 years or 35 years that this has been, you can see that for the most part, the government has been doing more than privately sponsored by design. But if we zoom into the last 15 years or so, you can see that a lot changed in 2016, and the plan has been since then, except for COVID, of course, for there to be more privately sponsored because there is such a high demand for that. You can see also that the projections for this year and the next 2 years is lower. There was a 20% cut in terms of immigration targets for this year compared to last year, and that's going to go down slightly in the next couple of years. The government is wanting to cut back permanent residency and temporary residency because they talk about there being a housing problem, and they talk about immigration as being part of that problem. We disagree with that, but that is the rationale. So we will see a reduction in the next few years of the number of refugees resettled to Canada. That's briefly resettlement. There are engagement in complementary pathways in Canada. First of all, the longest program is the WUSC, World University Services of Canada Student Refugee Program, which started in 1978. So it's been going a long time. Every year they bring about 150 students to Canada who go to a university in Canada. They are part of the humanitarian stream, so that green line at the bottom, they come in that category. WUSC is a sponsorship agreement holder, and so they administer that with students groups across Canada. The refugees must qualify for the university, and so they have to have the academic credentials for that, and they have to be having a sufficient level of English or French to study. And there's some websites there you can check into more. A newer program is Canada's Economic Mobility Pathway Pilot, EMPP for short, starting in 2018. Last year, there were about 550 people who came under EMPP, 220 of them being the principal applicant and the others being dependents of the principal applicant. This is essentially an economic program. So the blue line at the top of those charts, it comes from that area. So it's not a humanitarian program as such. It's in the economic stream. People who apply for this, they generally have to have a job offer, though there are some spaces for people who do not have a job offer. Applicants must meet the work experience requirements, the education levels, and the language levels to get that job. And in the difference from this in a regular immigration process or economic immigration process is a lot of the fees are waived, and there are some helps from various agencies to help refugees to apply for this. There is recently a survey done by UNHCR Canada. I have a link for that, and I will try and put these links somewhere so it's easier for you to get. And that's my report about what it's like in Canada.
Thanks, Brian. Again, really great to sort of see the trends and what's new and older in the program. Finally, Australia. Back to Paul to tell us a bit about what's going on in Australia.
Sorry, I just had to on muting. Yeah, I've hopefully you can see a slide there which attempts to put all the statistics into one slide. It's a complicated picture. You will hear from the Australian government that we have a refugee and humanitarian program of 20,000 places a year currently, but that is not 20,000 resettlement places. The program includes permanent visas through the onshore protection program given to people who came to Australia and sought asylum in Australia. So convention refugees, as the Kiwis would call them, or asylees who are given protection, as the Americans would, to use the American term. So in the financial year in Australia, like New Zealand, finishes on the 30th of June. So up to the 30th of June last year, Australia gave permanent protection to 3,250 people in the country. So that was taken out of the overall program of 20,000. And in the current year, the targets for the Department of Home Affairs is that they expect to give around 4,000 visas. So that means that 16,000 of the 20,000 people under this year's refugee and humanitarian program are coming as refugees from outside the country. Unfortunately, the program also includes community sponsorship. So community sponsorship is not complementary in Australia yet. That's and we have three forms of community sponsorship. One that's brand new, just getting off the ground. So the CRISP, the Community Refugee Integration and Sponsorship Pilot, is for UNHCR referred refugees who are supported by community groups. These groups don't have any connection with the refugees, so it's a very traditional sponsor a stranger program, and that pilot over the past 4 years has supported more than 550 refugees to settle in Australia. The good news is that the program will become a permanent, the pilot will become a permanent program from July 2026. The bad news is it will still be within the refugee and humanitarian program. So we have more work to do to push for it to be additional. And it will be set at 200 places per year. And the view of the organisation most involved in supporting this, CRISA, is that the demand for places will increase once it becomes an additional program, and people can see that they're adding to the number of places by being part of it. There is also the community support program, which is a very expensive form of named sponsorship. There are many flaws in the program design, and there's a need for reform, but it does give families of refugee background an option of being able to sponsor and to nominate and sponsor relatives to come to the country, which is overwhelmingly what it is. The problem is that it's costing many tens of thousands of dollars for those families to do that. Last financial year, just over 1,500 places were in the community support program. This year, we're working on 2,500 places, but that is part of the special humanitarian program. And then we have a new refugee student settlement pathway, which is based on the WUSC model in Canada. It's a pilot program of 20 places, which is just getting underway this calendar year. So 20 places for refugees from Southeast Asia initially, and those numbers have been taken from the special humanitarian program. So what this means is that in terms of resettlement places that are not community sponsorship, last financial year there were around 15,000 places. This financial year we're expecting around 13,200, 13,300 places as part of that 20,000 program. We have a national election coming up on the 3rd of May, and the opposition Liberal National Coalition, and the Liberal Party is not a Liberal Party, it's a Conservative Party, they're pledging to cut the program back to its former level of 13,750 places, so that by taking more than 6,000 places out of the program on the current numbers, that would mean there would only be about 7,000 traditional resettlement places if they're elected and they implement that promise. The one part of the picture that is complementary and is additional is the Skilled Refugee Labour Agreement pilot. Since the pilot started a few years ago, there have been 133 candidates have arrived to take up jobs in Australia, including family. That's been just over 300 people. As I understand, there are 200 job offers currently being applied for and investigated. The problem is that the 4-year pilot ends on the 30th of June. The Department of Home Affairs is currently reviewing it, and they will make a recommendation, presumably to continue the pilot to the incoming government. But given that the incoming government is unlikely to, whoever is the minister is probably not likely to be sitting at their desk until mid-May, that doesn't actually leave a lot of time for the extension of that pilot. But it's a program, which is small, working well, but also poorly supported by government. Ironically, the Australian government is the chair of the Global Task Force on Refugee Labour Mobility, so we hope that program is going to continue and get better supported. So that's a quick summary of what's happening in Australia.
Thanks. I think all presenters need a big round of applause for trying to get through in a very short period of time what are very complex kind of areas of policy. So well done to our speakers. Moving on to our second question, we've set the scene in terms of resettlement and complementary pathways. IRISE was really set up as a network to focus on what happens after refugees resettle or arrive on a complementary pathway. So what happens in our countries to help newcomers feel welcomed, valued, included, supported, and to thrive. This is obviously another really big question, but I'm going to invite our speakers our colleagues to talk about how settlement and integration is facilitated in your countries. So I'm going to start with Canada this time, and I want to invite Valerian or Valley to tell us a little bit about post-arrival support in Canada. Over to you.
Thank you, Louise. Canada has, the government of Canada has two streams of funding. One is the Resettlement Assistance Program, and another one is the Settlement Services funding. The Resettlement Assistance Program offers services until clients move to permanent accommodation. And settlement services, so it's a short-term program, usually around 6 weeks, although they take care of the income support that the government is providing for a year, or for some people, it would be the privately sponsored refugee who received income support from their sponsor for a period of time. So in terms of the flow, it is they enter the resettlement assistance program or a similar type of services that would be offered by the group of 5 or the sponsoring church or the sponsoring community organization. Basically, refugees arrive at the airport and there's a point of entry services, which take care of them. They have people who speak the language and would destine them to their final destination. It could be land transport or air transport. Once they arrive in their final destination, they offer temporary accommodation. They go through a need assessment and orientation and information services, which enable them to understand a little bit of the new culture, have their first bank account set up, register for provincial healthcare services, apply for social insurance number, and get started on their journey. Once people move to a permanent accommodation, so the resettlement assistance program would help them locate appropriate housing, or it would be the sponsoring group would have perhaps a housing already prepared for the new arrival, and they would start their journey mostly through the settlement process, which is a program for all newcomers to Canada, but refugees are given priority. It's a program that supports registering children to school. There is case management for refugees who need more medical attention, or we have victims of torture, and we have also support services that enable people to access government and community services. Like government services, for example, that would enable them to benefit all that is offered to Canadians, because resettled refugees are permanent residents. Also, it's important to make those community connections for services, but also for social support, like with the community organization, with the churches, with families. Like there's a match program that matches Canadian families with newcomer families, or it could be a match, professional match. So that's a match program. There are conversation circles. Newcomers who need language training would go through language assessment, and they'd be referred to language training. So overall, it's, looking at the employment readiness, social community integration, mental health and wellness, and, housing and financial assistance and support for women, children, seniors, LGBTQ plus people that need this type of supports. There's a Francophone integration pathway that is specialized organization that will take care of that in the Anglophone provinces. Quebec has its own. They organize their own resettlement process. They're also very important to mention that, as you've seen, the private sponsorship is bigger in number than the government assisted refugees. This type of services, I'm from a settlement organization, but they're offered by community members from the churches, groups of 5, or community sponsors. Thank you.
Thanks, Vali. Moving on now to Australia, we'll go to next. Wanted to invite Rose to tell us about the Australian response.
Thanks, Louise. So just trying to get all the screens up. So Australia's refugee resettlement system is designed to support humanitarian entrants as they rebuild their lives, integrate into their communities, and work towards self-reliance. Our system provides structured post-arrival support through government-funded and community-delivered programs with the aim of establishing the essential foundations of settlement, both in basic needs such as like financial, housing, education, employment, well-being like health and mental health, safety, relationships, access to services, life skills development, and belonging, which is like the sense of community and connection. As Paul mentioned, there are multiple pathways for humanitarian entrants to arrive in Australia, which I've attempted to capture in this infographic because there is a lot, but which make up our humanitarian intake and determines their eligibility for various support services. So today I'll just focus mainly on some of the primary ones and not the complementary pathways, but they are kind of in this infographic. The largest of the settlement programs is the Humanitarian Settlement Program, or the HSP. And this provides critical support in the first 12 to 18 months after arrival, helping refugees with the development of foundational life skills, linking to essential services like financial, like welfare, support, housing, including we provide the first 28 days free rent and utilities and a basic household goods package. Healthcare access, employment pathways, and community connections. There is also a kind of a sub-program within this program which offers intensive case management support for individuals facing complex settlement challenges for up to the first 5 years. So they can be exited from this program and come back in if they are presenting with barriers, complex settlement barriers. This program's also been instrumental in responding to kind of the global humanitarian crisis as well, including the Afghan and Ukrainian arrivals recently. And there are 5 lead for-purpose organisations across the country delivering this service. For children arriving without parents or legal guardians, we have a very small unaccompanied humanitarian minors program, which offers safe accommodation, case management and support services until they reach 18 or are ready for independent living. The unaccompanied minors are under the guardianship of the Minister for Immigration, and the custodianship is then delegated to specialised non-profits or state welfare agencies. Language is considered really key to integration, and the Adult Migrant English program provides unlimited free English tuition hours to humanitarian entrants and migrants, and offers flexible learning options, including childcare support and kind of flexible hours like weekends or part-time to ensure that language is not a barrier to successful settlement. Beyond the initial settlement phase of that 12 to 18 months, there's the Settlement Integration and Transition Support Program, which helps refugees transition into long-term independence, providing casework support, employment and training assistance, and also fosters social inclusion and community capacity building with our cultural and faith communities, acknowledging that settlement is not achieved in isolation. There's also been some recent policy changes in this space which have recognised that settlement's a long-term journey, And it now allows individuals to access this program beyond 5 years post-arrival. So someone could be in the country, for example, for 20 years and still be able to seek that support. For young refugees, the Youth Transition Support Program assists those aged 15 to 25 in adapting to school, building language and social skills, and preparing for employment. And there's also targeted mentoring and career guidance, which helps them successfully transition into Australian society. All humanitarian entrants to Australia are able to access Centrelink on arrival, which is the federal welfare system, and also Workforce Australia, our federal employment system, to support the transition into life in Australia. There's also specialised services such as torture and trauma support, refugee health services, education supports, and employment initiatives, which further strengthen the settlement ecosystem. There is also other supports, including Medicare, which enables access to free healthcare, English as a second language support in schools, and other employment and training services, which ensures that the system that refugees, are within are receiving accessible, comprehensive assistance throughout their journey of settlement. Majority of these programs are funded by the Australian government, primarily through the Department of Home Affairs, with additional contributions from other federal, state and local governments, corporate partners and non-profits. This is a blended kind of funding approach, which ensures that services remain resourced and responsive to community needs. However, this does come with risks when funding is reduced or ceased. From early settlement assistance through to that long-term programs, the goal is clear in Australia to provide refugees with the resources and opportunities they need to build independent, fulfilling lives in Australia. Thank you.
That was an incredible, Rose. It would be wonderful to be able to share that slide because it is a really complex picture, and I think you've captured some of those key services beautifully. All right, moving to the United States. Olivia, do you want to share with us?
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Louise. And I just kind of want to go back to what John shared about, the resettlement landscape in the US right now is kind of under a microscope, and we're facing some challenges right now. So we kind of wanted to go back to what resettlement looked like in the US prior to January of 2024. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. And what some of our post-arrival support services look like. Another thing I wanted to mention before I get started is one of our things that we wanted to do is kind of avoid our acronyms, but many of my colleagues in the US, that we love our acronyms. So it's going to be kind of hard to skip some of those things, so I can send out some explainers afterwards. If I go through acronyms, it's just like another language to me. But when refugees and special immigrant visa holders arrive in the US, they are resettled through the Reception and Placement R&P program through the Department of State. This program supports them for 90 days with things like setting up their apartments, finding housing supplies for them, giving them basic necessities, supporting them with food assistance, enrolling them in public benefits, helping them find employment, helping them find long-term medical care, helping them enroll in school, helping them with cultural orientation. This initial reception and placement R&P program is provided via local resettlement agencies. These local resettlement agencies use case managers, employment specialists, employment counselors, housing specialists, and cultural orientation providers to provide these services to newly arriving clients. So the R&P program existed for upwards of 40 years in the US. And then in 2023, the Department of State introduced the private sponsorship program Welcome Corps. So the Welcome Corps was sort of a mirror to the R&P program, but through private Americans. So rather than a case manager providing all of those initial resettlement services, it was then a private citizen with a group of up to 5 individuals that would both financially sponsor refugees as well as provide all of those services for them. So refugees either arrive in 2 buckets, through R&P, through the Department of State, or through the Welcome Corps. And then for a period of up to 5 years, refugees and special immigrant visa holders are also eligible for services through the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the US. The Office of Refugee Resettlement offers a number of services for up to 5 years in things like intensive case management, support services for older refugees, youth mentorship programs, health and mental health programs, micro enterprise loan programs to help newly arrived refugees with big purchases or setting up businesses, whatever it may be, and many other things. And like I said, that period is for up to 5 years after they arrive. Another really, really important aspect and huge pillar of our resettlement programs is our integration with the community. The U.S. Refugee Admission Program is a public-private sponsorship. So while all the programs I talked about earlier were funded through the U.S. government, it's also really integral that the community has buy-in as well to support our programs. Many of our local offices utilize relationships with local faith-based communities or universities to further their programs. But one thing that's really important to us, and that is sort of a cornerstone of our resettlement programs, is the idea of a regular community consultation. So through all of the programs that the U.S. government facilitates, local offices, and I think as of January 2024, it was over 300 in the U.S., they are required on a quarterly basis to meet with representatives from the local government, from the public health office, from the school department, from the public safety in their area, to coordinate on services and to ensure that any newcomers in the area are being supported. So the public part comes from all the services that I talked to at the end, at the beginning, and then the private part is the community buy-in and that quarterly consultation that really brings everybody to the table and makes sure that there's an active voice from the local community as well. One other thing I just wanted to talk about quickly was an integrations outcome report that we worked with RCOA, Refugee Congress, and the Ethiopian Community Development Council on in 2022. On the idea that this metric of self-sufficiency that we use to think about successful resettlement and integration in the US, and that we put on all of our grant applications and that our funders really look at, is not exactly the full picture of what a successful refugee looks like in the US. So this report actually looks at successful integration from a lens of, what is their English language level, what is their employment and their livelihood, what's their education, what's their health and mental health look like, what is their housing, are they a homeowner, what are they, what is their access to transportation, racial justice and inequality, and where do they kind of scale out on all of those things? So we will share that in a link after this, but I think it's really important to look at, and it's a major measure of how refugees are doing after all of these services that I talked about in the US. We are starting to pilot some self-assessments in Chicago and kind of moving that through, but that's going to be something that we're going to try and use. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're changing things up. Our landscape is looking rapidly different, so we're hoping that looking at some of those outcomes will lead to further innovations in the future. But that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Olivia. And it'd be great to have that report. If someone can post that in the chat, that would be excellent. On to New Zealand, we have Aklilu, Paul and Gail. If you want to tell us a bit about the supports in New Zealand.
Thank you so much. Kia ora koutou katoa. Greeting to all of you in your own language, whatever. So my name is Aklilu and I'm the Community Engagement Lead with New Zealand Red Cross. So me, Gail and Paul will be talking about post-arrival. So as previously my colleague mentioned that New Zealand usually we get like a refugee quota, which is 1,500, and then we have also complementary pathways, family reunification, and the community sponsorship. Mainly I will focus on the quota refugee at the post-arrival. So all former refugee or refugee, when they arrive to New Zealand, they arrive to Auckland, which is one of our biggest city. And in Auckland, we have a center, which we call it Te Ahurumawai Aotearoa, which is the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Service Center. So this, I think it's unique. And this is what you usually be proud of it as Kiwi, that we have the service center. And every former refugee who arrived to the country stay in this center for 5 weeks. And this center usually support a former refugee or refugee to get prepared to their life in New Zealand. So the center holds up to 196 beds, but usually a mass arrival also can accommodate up to 300 individuals. So in this center, there are multi-agents. It's led by Immigration New Zealand, but there are other agents like Refugee as a Survival New Zealand. This is a mental health service provider, and Sharon is in the call. She might talk later on about that. And we have the Auckland University of Technology, which is usually they provide the orientation. So usually people, they get some orientation while they are in Mangere, and also English assessment for ESOL, English as second language. And we have the Mangere Health Service Center, which they go through a thorough screen of their health situation and all stuff before they go to their settlement location. And also we have the Ministry of Social Development, that they go through all the social welfare and benefits and all stuff. And of course, all refugee, when they arrived in New Zealand, they have immediately after they arrive, they get their permanent residence, and they have access to all the service that the mainstream has. I will pass to Paul. He will talk about what happened in the Mangere.
Hi, can you hear me? Cool. Thank you, Akilo, and thank you, Louise, and everyone attending this Hui. As my colleague said, so the family stays in Mangere for 5 weeks, and week 4, we service providers, we go to Mangere to visit the families for case handover. So in the morning, we normally meet with the immigration case officers to do the case handovers, and after 1 o'clock, we do meet with families. And the aim of meeting with families is to explain what kind of services we're going to be providing for the families. And mostly because we are certain locations, we meet family face to face, and those who do not really access, or those who may not be able to travel around, they do a Zooming one. So we explain the families the kind of services they're going to be getting from us. And then because from Mangere, they have done their work and income, they have done IRD. So once they arrive in Hamilton or in Christchurch or Auckland, any regions, so we do have case workers, and the case worker may be social worker, maybe anyone just working with the families. And we do provide language support as well with families arriving. So the house is provided by immigration. And then, so once the house is secured, we do allocate a number of volunteers working with case workers to do the house setups. And once the arrival date has been confirmed, so we welcome the families. It depends as well whether 2, 3 families are coming together. We can welcome them to our offices, or if it is only one family, they do go directly to their property. So while the families are still in Mangere, as we have done the paperwork, we do start registering children to school, clinics, and maybe get more information from uni or Unitech to make sure when the family they are here, they have enough support. So we do support 1 to 2 years, giving them support. So once the family they are here, they do really feel more comfortable. And maybe another thing I can add on that, we do provide lunch and sometimes dinner for families. So day 1, they don't really have to worry about what they're gonna eat. So yeah, they feel more comfortable. So the internet, power, gas is connected while the family they are still in Mangere. Because once we get all the paperwork, so the team here, they do start directly signing up with with internet and power and gas as well. So the case workers or anyone who is working with families, they do really work directly with work and income to make sure the family, they don't miss their benefits. Yeah, I think, another thing I can add on that is once the family they're in the communities, we do orientations where they attend around 8 days orientation. But in Hamilton, we do like half days, but I know other regions, they do sometimes full days. Yeah, so where all the stakeholders will come and talk to refugees and explain on what kind of services they'll be getting from all those stakeholders and how long it can take. Yeah, thank you.
Gail, did you want to add to that?
I think Paul's covered it really well. All I would add to it is that there are 6 different social service providers within New Zealand. So 2 are kaupapa Māori agencies, so that aligns themselves with methodology and philosophy around our Indigenous people. One of them is Porapora Whitu, which I work for, and another one is Kahui Tukaha, which is in Auckland. Hamilton has a multicultural service, and they are based on former refugee background people that initiated it, I think, and it grew from there. Also, the Multicultural Canterbury Charitable Trust and Presbyterian Support, which is in South Canterbury, and Red Cross, who cover 8 regions as well. And so all of us have our own flavour of resettlement and have come up with local solutions and local initiatives. I think we all have common themes, and that's, you know, sort of aligning ourselves with the refugee resettlement strategy, which is participation and inclusion, health and wellbeing, housing, education, training, in English language, and employment and self-sufficiency. I think it's really good that there are differences, that all of the social service providers are able to collaborate and hear about different initiatives within different regions. For instance, we've just started here in Aotearoa, which is Christchurch, a welcome dinner. So new arrivals come and they meet the host communities at a dinner. And I'm aware that there's lots of different things that are provided in different regions. Just to elaborate on Paul's explanation about the houses, post-arrival houses are sourced from Auckland, MB, which is the Ministry of Employment and Innovation. So the houses and tenancy is sourced directly from there. And so no resetting individuals come to the region without having a house that has been sourced for them. This is permanent tenancies for up to a year. The houses are viewed regionally to make sure they're safe and secure and of a good standard. And also MB do provide a furniture for basic furniture pack for all houses. And I think the local regions provide homeware packs. They can be sourced from local donations or can be provided as new ones as well. We have 7 intakes per year, so it's an ongoing intakes. And I think that's all I have to say at the moment. As a quick snapshot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you to all our speakers. So we're kind of in our last 15 minutes, and this is where we were hoping to have a bit more of a think about a reflection from a few speakers, but also from you as participants about where we go next and where we can use these things. So I'm going to invite our remaining kind of speakers who were asked to reflect on this. So we have Sharon, Birgit, Ismail, Emily, and Monica. Hopefully we'll have us all spotlighted. And the question that we were going to ask these speakers was, you know, how are you feeling about refugee resettlement in these times? And particularly that we've heard about some of the challenges in some of our countries and some of the changes, some of the trends. How do we feel about it? And how do we think about these sorts of exchanges as useful for generating ideas, inspiration, and solidarity? We were also going to invite participants to sort of unmute as well. But what I'm going to ask is that we post the poll, Chloe, in the chat which is the questions about where we're going next, and what we do with this thing. So while we're listening to this group of people, I really encourage you to click on the poll in the chat when it comes up, and there's 3 questions there about where we go next. So just thinking about those reflections, if we can keep our interventions quite short, but starting with you, Sharon, and Birgit, how were you feeling in New Zealand about resettlement and these sorts of exchanges?
And just looking at the question, I suppose I'd say fairly stable, because Rachel made it very clear. Not, New Zealand's not that badly affected by what's going on in America. We're more affected by our own government and the cuts that are going on internally within the country, and also the what we call here the brain drain, where people, professionals leave New Zealand and go to Australia and other places. So we have a lot of inequity in our regions. I work with refugee mental health, so we're dealing a lot with torture and trauma services. The one thing I could say will affect us quite strongly with the Americans, and we know it from the past when we had Trump last time, is that it creates a bottleneck of people coming into, the list of people trying to get in becomes very clogged up, and we end up having quite a large, high and complex needs quota. And what that does is that creates downward pressure on all of the services that are managing, particularly, I'm out at Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre today because we've got 2, I only work in Auckland, I've got 2 mental health teams, one here that do assessment and stabilising and consult liaison for people going into the regions, and then I've got a community team. And they become, well-being becomes a massive issue. How to stabilise my team, how to make sure that I can keep recruitment high and stop burnout, because in New Zealand as well, we take categories that some other countries don't take, which is like women at risk and disability categories, which complicate even more. So yeah, it's challenging times. Where I feel like in terms of the stability, I think as long as the program remains fairly stable, I think we're okay. I think the challenges will be ongoing in terms of, as I say, the issue around torture and trauma and the people coming through the door. I think one of the other questions you wanted us to ask was around international resettlement and integration. Just my relationships, I have very, very strong ones in the torture and trauma centres in Australia. I'm constantly in touch with them. I do training with them, and we work very closely together. So lots and lots of learning. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. Birgit, anything more to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add 1 or 2 quick things to that. Thank you, Sharon. I totally agree with what Sharon is saying. I think our current political environment is making it really challenging, both nationally with a new government as well as international influences. And so whatever we're advocating for as a sector, we have to be really mindful what we're advocating for, that it's not at the cost of another program or numbers in another program. And so that's also the uncertainty we still have around the future of the community refugee sponsorship program. And of course, we have the same issues as many other countries around housing crisis and, as Sharon said, mental health services. But there's also a lot of positive things that are happening. For example, we have a New Zealand Refugee Advisory Panel that started up a couple of years ago, and they're going really strong in terms of advising government policies. And I think that's really critical, maintaining that in our current political environment. We're also having a national body, which is the Refugee Alliance, that is made up of over 40 organizations that are really looking at how we can advocate together. I think that's what we're really trying to do at the moment, is bringing the sector together rather than being separate and having a much stronger voice as a sector. And there's also a meaningful refugee participation project that was initiated by the government, which allows refugees to be more involved at all levels of resettlement, which I think is really critical. As someone already said, you know, nothing about us without us in one of the chats before. I think that's a really critical piece of work, again, to have levers to be more involved. And there's also some research happening that we can draw on when we're using our advocacy efforts. Thanks.
Thanks. It's good to hear of those good glimmers of hope as well in a challenging environment. Okay, Ismail, over to you from Australia.
Thank you very much, Louise. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah, okay, great. Well, first of all, I'd like really to acknowledge the Aboriginal people and the Torres Islanders, the custodians of the land. I'm joining you from and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I would like really to thank you for the opportunity really to come and talk to the team. I know we don't have much time. Now, in Australia, I would say probably the general feeling is, as Paul, I think, highlighted, is people are concerned. And I really believe the sector is concerned about what is happening globally, which is impacting the global protection system. And whilst I think in Australia, it very much looks business as usual at the moment, but it is an election year and we don't know what is going to happen post-May. But also the diminishing capabilities and capacity of the international protection system when we look into what's happening in the US, the potential for European countries to withdraw their humanitarian programs, for example, or reduce their intakes. When you look into the UNHCR and what's happening there in terms of capacity, all these are concerns that may not necessarily impact Australia immediately, but with time, it could have a domino effect. But at the moment, it looks very much as outlined by Paul. There is a lot going on, and there is a potential for more improvements and separating the complementary pathways from the humanitarian, and that was going to be really a good outcome moving forward to support vulnerable people. But worst case scenario, I think if the current situation continues, at least if whatever does exist at the moment is maintained, I think that will be a win for the humanitarian sector in Australia, with the hope that we could really build the momentum and continue developing further. Now, I'm saying this as I've been in this sector for a long time, and I've seen the evolution, and I've seen the ups and downs, and all the profiling and the nationality based kind of sanctions. They happened before, and I do remember it was really big news, and it continued for a while. But then things started also to change. So these are the politics and the influences of these politics and its impact on people who are really very vulnerable and in a very difficult situation where politicians most of the time don't necessarily pay attention to, or use it in a very negative way, like in election times.
Thanks.
Now, just very quickly, I see this forum and the network being a great opportunity to really validate some of the good practices that we have in place, but at the same time learn more. And also anticipate some of the potential risks that could be on our way, and try to do something about them before they happen. So that's just my contribution. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Ismail. And I do apologize. We are running out of time. So we have had to cut our speakers a bit short now. So Emily, from the US, where are we finding hope?
Great. Thank you so much, Louise. And I'll keep this brief because I really want to hear what Monica has to say as well. So as John outlined earlier, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and refugee resettlement agencies in the United States are really under fire by the Trump administration. We've seen this through the suspension of refugee resettlement agencies' contracts and also withholding of funds for local resettlement agencies and national resettlement agencies. But meanwhile, the overarching feedback that I've personally heard from local resettlement agencies is that they're doing everything in their power to make sure that refugees that have been resettled in the United States are feeling supportive and safe, and that they really don't feel those immediate impacts of the Trump administration policies. As we mentioned earlier on this call, there's been mass layoffs and furloughs for refugee resettlement workers across the United States as the federal government has withheld funds and suspended programming. A story that we've actually heard from multiple resettlement agencies across the country that really shows the energy of welcome still stands despite the federal government efforts is that even after local resettlement staff have lost their jobs, they've actually come back as volunteers to really make sure that their clients that they had helped resettle in the United States had support ongoing and really just made sure that clients weren't left out without any support. We've seen this at RCOA through furloughed staff that have contacted me directly saying, I want to help working on projects to make sure that we document all the institutional knowledge that we've gained of resettlement programming over the past 4 years. So I would just say to close quickly that the energy amongst refugee resettlement service providers and advocates is that we're not going down without a fight. To meet that energy, our COSA is hosting a National Advocacy Days event, and our registration for the event is almost at 200 folks that are coming across the United States to show the federal government that we are really here to support and welcome refugees. It's 8:29, so I'm going to stop. And Monica, turn it over to you because we want to hear about Canada as well.
Please go ahead, Monica.
And Emily, when you and John and your colleagues speak, and honestly, I'm like choked up listening to you all right now in the work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing that. And I am not someone who's concise, so it is challenging to leave me to the very last person. So as you were all speaking, I was trying to really hone in on what is the most important thing to share. Of course, we are seeing also increasing anti-immigrant sentiment. We've seen active abuse and violence protests in front of our offices. Our sector is seeing about a 30% cut in line with the 30% reduction to the targets. In some parts of our country, like the province of British Columbia, 22 organizations were completely unfunded in this round of funding, which started on April 1st, so just a week ago. So it's been really hard, lots of layoffs in my own agency. That was also quite significant. And our sector's tired. Since 2015, since Syrians arrived, we've kind of been in constant crisis mode. And we've seen this in some research that was recently done on the mental health of our staff. But if you know anything about me and my work on the Health of the Sector Committee in our country, I'm a really hopeful person. And I think this is a really nice way to end today. I see hope everywhere, whether it's in our national resettlement bodies, new governance models that have increased the voice of the sector to work on issues around the health of our work. Some really brilliant work around gender-based analysis and mainstreaming in our work. That is being done at a national level, all things which I hope you'll all look at and plug into because it's not my work, but it's brilliant. I see hope in my former client who this year was nominated for Canada's National Music Awards for his Iraqi music. And it is a true sign of where we've come as a country because he was an asylum seeker. His parents were privately sponsored and his sister came under the government sponsored program. Or the Syrian family who opened a now famous chocolate shop in Nova Scotia, where I've been living recently, that is now an Amazon movie. I see hope in all of the new programs that our government has created and in the welcoming so many chartered flights. I was counting, and in my team alone, it's over 20. It was so many, we had to develop a toolkit nationally on how do you welcome chartered flights of resettled refugees. And we were the only country to get a flight out of Sudan in the last year. So we're really proud of that. And I want to leave you on a story from our Indigenous elders that have brought me a lot of hope in some of the darkest times in my career in the last couple of weeks, through layoffs and through changes to our own teams. And it's a story of abundance rather than a story of scarcity that I think will carry us through the IRISE program, which brings me hope, but also the work that is happening and the changes in all of our community. So imagine you're standing on the edge of, in Canada, a boreal forest. So it's a forest full of coniferous trees. And along the horizon, you see a sole pine tree with all of the branches stripped at the bottom. And it's not a natural formation, but it's a deliberate creation. And this, the Indigenous people in Alberta call a lobstick. And for generations, when Indigenous communities traveled through northern woodlands, they would intentionally strip away the lower branches and preserve the crown of these trees, creating markers that can be seen at great distances, where food had been cached, where medicine plants grew, where fresh water can be found, or where the safest passage lay through difficult terrain. When you spotted that distinctive silhouette in the distance, you knew immediately that someone who came before you had left something crucial for your journey. This is reciprocity in action. Today, you might be the traveler finding a cache. Tomorrow, you might be the one leaving supplies for others. But the wisdom lay in recognizing our profound interconnection and the reciprocity in action. For me, IRISE can be my lobstick. So I just want to welcome you all to IRISE. Thank you, Louise and Paul, for your brilliance of coming up with this idea and for welcoming us to the table. And may all of you find your own lobstick as we progress in this new uncharted territories.
Monica, I feel like I really shouldn't say anything after that because you've actually just ended our session absolutely beautifully. Of course, this is our first session, so we have got learnings around how we do this and how we facilitate meaningful conversations. But that to me was just a beautiful demonstration of what we can do. I'm going to end now, but really encourage you to please respond to the poll in the chat. We will also send this around to all registered participants, and that gives you a chance to put your hand up, to put your suggestions forward about how we structure these kinds of conversations going forward. We had a really ambitious agenda today, but I think we pulled something off, and I hope it's just the start of an ongoing conversation. So thank you for your time. Please answer the polls and the evaluation, which we will send in your email, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thank you, Louise.